You hear it all the time, right? The world is getting warmer. But what does that actually mean? Well, over the last 100 years or so, the global average temperature has gone up. And the number behind that huge statement, well, it might sound surprisingly small.
Just 1 degree Celsius. Seriously, think about that. If you check the weather and it's 1 degree warmer or cooler, you probably wouldn't even grab a different coat. But here's the thing. When we're talking about the entire planet's average, that single tiny degree acts like a trigger for massive, massive changes all across the globe.
So, what can 1 degree really do? What does a 1 degree warmer world actually look like on the ground, in the oceans, and for us? Let's dive in and break it down.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the impacts on water, then look at what's happening on land. After that, we'll get into the direct human cost, and finish up by tackling a really complex question. Are these effects hitting everyone the same way?
Okay, first up, let's talk about our planet's most important resource, water. Because one of the most obvious effects of a warmer world is happening right now in our oceans.
Since the year 1900, global sea levels have risen by 19 centimeters. Now, I know, that might not sound like a whole lot, but you have to imagine that slow, steady rise happening along every single coastline on Earth. It's a gradual creep, but it's already having some pretty huge consequences.
For people living in low-lying island nations, places like Vanuatu or the Maldives, 19 centimeters is a really big deal. It puts them at direct risk of coastal flooding. And in the worst-case scenarios, we're talking about the potential need to evacuate entire populations from the places their families have lived for generations.
But it's not just about how much water there is. It's also about the water's chemistry. You see, as things heat up, our oceans are basically soaking up more carbon dioxide from the air. Think of it like adding something acidic to a glass of water. It actually changes the water's pH balance.
And this change in chemistry leads to something devastating called coral bleaching. When the water gets too warm or too acidic, the coral gets stressed and literally kicks out the algae that gives it its color and food. It turns bone white. We've seen this happen to huge parts of Australia's Great Barrier Reef. And here's the truly tragic part. This isn't something they can recover from. It's irreversible. That ecosystem is just gone.
So that's what's happening in the water. But the effects of this 1 degree rise are just as dramatic when we move inland. Let's take a look at how it's reshaping the land around us.
It's pretty straightforward, really. Higher temperatures mess with rainfall patterns. So for places that are already dry, think about the areas right on the edge of the Sahara Desert. This just means they get even drier. The desert literally starts to expand.
When soil loses all its moisture, it just turns to dust, and then the wind can just blow it away. That process is called desertification, and it's how fertile farmland turns into desert. For the farmers who depend on that land, it's an absolute catastrophe. You can't grow crops without soil, and that threatens everything from their jobs to the food supply for whole regions.
So you've got hotter temperatures and you've got drier ground. Well, what do you think happens next? You get the perfect conditions for forest fires. And we've all seen the news. Their frequency is way up in places all over the world, from southern Europe to the western US, and of course, Australia.
All right, so we have rising seas, expanding deserts, and more fires. But these aren't just abstract environmental issues. They all have a very real and very serious human cost.
A warmer world isn't always a drier one. In some parts of the globe, it's actually getting wetter. And these warm, damp conditions, they are the absolute perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. And while some are just annoying, others are carriers, or vectors, for deadly diseases like malaria.
And the scale of this is just staggering. More than 500,000 people die from malaria every single year. As global warming expands the areas where these mosquitoes can live, that number could get even worse.
The impact hits our wallets, too. Think about towns and communities whose entire economy is built on winter tourism. Ski resorts, for example. As snowfall becomes less and less reliable, the ski season gets shorter, and the local economies that depend on that income face enormous challenges.
Okay, so this brings us to a much more complicated part of the story. Because while the big picture is overwhelmingly negative, the impacts are not spread out evenly. In fact, for some people, in some places, a few of these changes might even seem like a good thing.
Take the UK, for instance. A warmer climate might mean more reliable summers, which could be great for tourism, maybe lower heating bills in the winter. In parts of North America, it could open up new land for farming. This creates this really complex, uneven picture, where some folks might see a short-term benefit while others are facing a total disaster.
So this is the really crucial thing to get. The effects are all over the place. It's not a simple story of everything being bad for everyone, everywhere, all at once. It's a messy global situation with winners and losers, even if the long-term forecast is bad for all of us.
So let's just quickly recap the ripple effect of that 1 degree. We've got sea levels up by 19 centimeters. We've got desertification eating away at farmland. Coral reefs are bleaching and dying. The risk of malaria is going up. And, most importantly, these impacts are hitting the world in a really uneven way.
And all of that leaves us with one final, pretty sobering thought. We've just walked through the massive, world-changing consequences of a single degree of warming. So if this is what 1 degree looks like, what on earth happens at 1.5 or 2?